Hello, I'm the Wild Nerd, and in this video, it's going to be a tutorial trying to get through it quite quickly, where, as an exercise, because I think it's really useful actually for learning Unity and also learning a bit about level design, we're going to use the Unity's first-person shooter template to create our own short one-level FPS game. Now, of course, this is basically going to be what's known as an asset flip, which isn't something you ever really want to do when you're releasing a game commercially, right? It's a bad practice to do it that. But I think as a way of learning about creating levels and environments and familiarizing yourself with the entity component system within Unity, which we'll go into further, I think it is useful to, before you go into something as mammoth a task as creating your own first person game, which I've tried to do from scratch before and with relative degrees of success, but it's quite complicated. The first person template within Unity provides you with prefabs, pre-existing scripts and behaviors so that you can effectively do an asset flip, create your own guns, maybe create your own enemies, swap them out, and then also replace the environment as well. But it has the basic loop from a menu screen to a level to a kill all enemies objective all set up for you so that you don't have to do it yourself, which would, again, it would be a big task. Now, I think this is useful for learning how to create a Unity environment. Without further ado, we'll go into it. So at first, it's worth familiarizing yourself with the Unity interface. So I'll talk a little bit about that first, and then we'll go into specifics. We're going to cover obviously the interface, like I said, what basic tools do what. Then we're going to go on to swapping out one of the enemy characters, which you can make more complicated, but we're just going to do a basic version of it by swapping the model out. Then we'll go on to creating a custom gun, either creating a custom one or using predefined assets and swapping the gun out. Then we'll go on to terrain and level design. We can use some of the prefabs as well, I think, that come within the Unity first person template. For my students, I'd advise that you maybe try and create some buildings yourself in Blender and then port them into the game. I'll show you how to add colliders to that as well, so that you can, so that the player can collide them properly. There'll be a lot of terminology to get your head around, but I'll do my best to cover as much as I can as I go on. There'll be a lot of unfamiliar words, but don't worry, that's part of learning, so don't stress too much about that. Okay, so and also we'll be modifying the menu screens a bit as well, and all these other things, and also show you I'll talk about a bit about what a nav mesh is, and I'll just show you, because all you'll need for the extent of this tutorial is to be able to rebake your nav mesh. But again, it helps to be able to, I don't know, it's basically, the nav mesh is basically just a way for AI agents, which is artificial intelligence enemies we might have in the game, so they can know where the surroundings are, a bit like a map for their brains, right? Anyway, let's proceed. So first, the interface. So you'll see at the top you have your typical files for opening, loading files. There's quite a lot to go into there, way beyond what I can cover just in this tutorial. But we've got, you have mostly a file and your typical, you've got a window, obviously, many other. There's a lot actually there, but again, you've got your settings you can go into there. It's mostly used for configuring your project. You can also add objects as well into the scene from there. We'll be touching on that actually at the end of the project when we go to the build. Before we proceed actually then as well, I'll show you a version of what the FPS project started out as, and then what I was able to convert it into over about a period of 2 or 3 hours, just to give you an idea of what's possible. This actual final game that I ended up creating is very basic and not really all that advanced, but again, it was just a bit of an exercise. So I changed a few things around, added some original music as well. Not original music, some music from Pixabay. And then, yeah, I was able to get a bit of a different scene going. So I'll show those 2 clips now. So that should give you an idea of what the possibilities are. So, as I said, much more possibilities beyond that in terms of what you can create, because I just create that as an example. So hopefully you can do even better than I did, to be honest. The idea I was going with there was a sort of Cold War-esque area, brutalist flats. But anyway, going back to what I was saying about the interface. So on the left hand side, you've generally got your scene. So if we're in the default view, you have your scene, and then you've got you have different levels in a hierarchy system, or entity hierarchy system. An entity is an object that you add into the scene. So, and then anything you nest below an object. So if you created, for example, an object that was called egg, you could then nest a model called egg underneath it, but you could also nest particle systems that could appear. Now, when you go into the FPS template, you'll see that on the left, that the entities are organized by what they do. So you've got an event system, a gameplay system. Now, like I said, the good thing about this is that it's all set up for you. Otherwise, it would probably be at least 2 or 3 days of work, even if you knew what you're doing. Maybe a day if you really knew what you're doing. But again, all the scripts are provided for you, so it helps to shortcut that. Now, to open up an entity, you click on it. You can also right click and then add an entity. That could be a 3D cube, a primitive. It could be a sound. There's too many to go over, but again, that's the main function of that area. Anytime you double click on one of those entities, you'll also zoom to it in the scene, which is in the middle. So the scene in the middle, you've got 2 tabs which you definitely need to be aware of. So there's scene, which just shows the editor version of your scene, but there's also game, so that you can preview your scene, which becomes important as you go on, because you can carry on testing and you can debug if you have any issues with errors coming up, So that's, again, is also very useful, because then you can debug, try and figure out what's going wrong, and it's also very useful for what's known as playtesting, which is where you test the difficulty of your game. Okay, that's that done. On the right hand side, we've generally got where we deal with components. So these are component systems, are basically additional functionality that we can add to an object, right? So for example, if you have a mesh, you can also add a mesh collider, which means that in the physics engine, that it can collide more realistically with other objects. Basically, they're also included within the 3D physics system. Or you could add many different things. Actually, you could add a particle system. It basically allows you to, and you can add scripts. That's one of a very important thing. Now, obviously, on our course, we don't really go into scripting, but you do need to know that you can add scripts there, which will then give you additional behavior which you can program, or you can get someone to program for you. We'll dive deeper into that as we go on, but that again is worth knowing. And then at the bottom there we have our assets. So it's the assets that are we have for our project. So we can also add what's called packages as well. So these are predefined prefabs, which are like prefabrications is what they're full. It's a shortened form of that word. So that basically means we can plug in pre-created assets like trees, for example, if we don't want to create them from scratch, and we could use somebody else's version of it. We can also create materials there, which is very important, and we will go into later how exactly you do that. And that's useful for textures, and it's pretty key to know about that, but we will be covering it later. Okay, so we'll go into it. So the first thing we want to do, I think, is we want to create I'll walk you through the process anyway of how I did it. So there are enemies already existing within the game with behaviors that are able to shoot the player, but I think it would be quite useful if you're able to replace at least one of them, maybe not the big turret one but the smaller ones, with your own model. Now I did a very basic like mask model, which I'll show the process of creating that here, but you might want to do something a bit more sophisticated. That's up to you, or you could do something similar like a robot. And what we need to do to actually get that up and running, I'll run you through now. So we first need to find the prefab that the existing enemies are using. So if you remember before, I said that prefabs are short for prefabrications. So it's like a template for everything. Every time you put what's known as an instance, or that a version of that, you've got like basically it's a bit like a class if you're familiar with programming, but it's just basically the template for all these, which always will remain the same. Though you can override it as well. But anyway, it's a template of the thing you want to put into the level. So for the enemies, if you could open up the enemy prefab, I'll show you how to do that on the video. And then you need to see what there is. Like there's an object in there already, and we want to line up the enemy that we've created as much as we can. So we import in our model first. We'll texture it up. I'll go on to the materials later if I haven't already covered that. And then we add our model in. After we've done that, we need to line it up to where the current object is. And then once we've done that, we turn off the existing object. Now, the way that it's set up currently, it does need some references, which I'll go through on screen, of assets you'll need to update. Primary one being it's already set to the root, so as long as you've put the new model that you've added in the FBX file, which is a type of file that Unity accepts for 3D models, you then want to add that under the root hierarchy, which is where the enemy prefab is set to load from. So that's quite important actually. After you've done all that, there is a firing position which you will likely need to update. So this is where the enemy fires from, the position they fire from. So set that somewhere appropriate. You probably want to set it to where the enemy's guns are, right, in the model. Save all that, go back into the scene, which is still going to be the standard scene, and you should see that lo and behold, the model is in there. There might be some headaches that might occur. If you get any errors, I'd say just check to see what it says. If the error message for debugging, it's usually useful to check if it says about missing references. That may be a starting point. Clicking on the error messages can sometimes be a bit of a can be useful, but you need to be able to understand the code usually to be able to debug them sometimes, so it can also be a bit confusing. But if you followed the video, it should be alright, and you should have that first updated asset flipped item in there. So that's good. That's the first step done. Next, so we're going on to the weapon. So again, we're just going to modify an existing prefab for the gun, and we want to modify as little as possible, really, because we don't want to break the existing systems. But to start with that, we have to create a gun model, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily even be a gun. I mean, obviously, if you wanted to, you can also leave guns out entirely. If you want to do something that's just an environment you explore, that is another avenue you could go down. You could even add dialogues with NPCs, but I'm not covering that in this video. But there are systems that allow you to do that within Unity. But again, I'm not going to cover that. So yeah, you design a gun, export it as an FBX, and create some textures in Photoshop which you think would be good. The important thing with the gun modelling, I think, is to basically have it so you've got some different areas you can target as well in terms of the mesh. So, or you can do a full UV as well, but it depends how confident you are with 3D texturing. You can texture within Blender. It might actually be easier if you can do it, but you can do both. Okay, so we'll go on to just loading the gun in, and then I think I'm going to talk about materials, because materials are something we're going to be using a lot going forward, and how to create, textures and materials and tile them as well correctly, because sometimes you need to adjust the sizes. So you've got your gun, you go to the following prefab element, which will be on screen now, and it's very similar process to before. We load in the model, so we import the asset in, so import new asset, load the FBX model in, and then we replace the existing gun model with the new one. So the main things here are it has an overheat particle system, which you can, may as well keep it in there. You could replace it with something else, but again, that's up to you. You probably can remove the overheat. I'm not sure how it would affect overall gun mechanics, so it might be safer to leave it in. But yeah, you can leave that in there. So that's again a case of selecting the entity within the scene, moving it, positioning it to the relevant place where your gun is. Again, you want to scale it so that it's roughly in proportion to where the gun was before in the original asset. Test that on the game screen, have a look, see if it looks right. Scale it down, scale it up, and line it up. All going well, it should still fire bullets, but you should have an updated model. What I would also advise is that you just, instead of deleting the original gun asset, at least at first anyway, just switch the little button in the left hand corner of the tick box just to hide it. Once you're confident that it's actually working, you can delete that, but again, to err on the side of caution, check the entity hierarchy, check anything that you need to load over. Okay, so that's that part done. So next we're going to go on to materials. I'm going to show you how to create a material, which is what we'll go on to mostly next alongside terrains. So you are going to want to right click, create material. This will come up with, when you click on that material, once you've named it, the usual naming convention is to do camel casing or whatever you like really, but I usually call it something like snow and then uppercase M for mat, snow material. Some people prefer doing hyphens, snake casing, so that's all lowercase, and snow hyphen mat. Well, that's naming conventions. Once you've clicked on the material, you can look on the right. The main way to load in a texture, if you can have specular or metallic. Metallic's obviously for metallic looking objects, so anything made of metal. But for specular, which is what we'll do first, we'll load in, find a snow texture. We just found one online. I just found one online. A white seamless snow texture, but you could also create your own, of course. With textures, I'd say generally, like, it's fine to use pre-created ones, but if possible, you can make your own. Depends on what visual style you want, right? Anyway, do that. Drag the texture that you've loaded into Albedo. You can change the smoothness. You should be able to change various other things. You can add emission, which is like a glow, but that's only for specific materials, really. Smoothness, which affects how matte it is as well. So you can play around that to get the right effect you want. And then to actually apply a texture, the easiest way, a material, the easiest way is to drag that material onto a mesh and just see if it updates. Usually the easiest way. You can also update it from the right hand side component menu, usually on different meshes or boxes or cubes or geometries. Okay, so yeah, we should now have created a material called snowmat. So what we're going to do now, you should have an enemy in there, replaced gun. Now we have to start just deleting some of the levels that are in there. So there are two ways you could go with this. You could just keep the original levels and then build on top of it if you want. But yeah, you can also just start deleting those levels and we'll replace it with our own terrain. So the first thing we're going to do is create a terrain. So to create a terrain, you follow the menu here that I'm clicking on, add create new terrain from the top menu. That adds like a flat plane that you can then sculpt. It's a lot like painting, or well, not painting, we're using clay. So there's various different tools you can use. There's a tabbed interface. There's currently now two ways of using it. So there's in version 6 of Unity, there's also an editor in the editor for the tools. But the traditional way is on the right hand side, but you can probably use both depending on which version of Unity you're using. If you're using the older version, just use there's a tabbed interface on the right. A lot of the time people get confused as to where you actually have the textures, but if you go to the most right tab menu on the component for terrain, when you're clicking on the terrain, drag your snow mat texture, drop it on there. There you go, you've got your snow texture applied and it should tile correctly. For tiling, which I forgot to mention actually, you might sometimes have to stretch textures in different ways depending on the size of the 3D object that they're applied to. So again, you might have to use different versions, create different versions of a material depending on what texture you're creating. The FPS template does also come with a bunch of predefined materials, so you can use those as well if you wish. So create a terrain, not going to take a bit of time, sculpt, raise it up. To lower down, you press shift as well, and it has the opposite effect. So you just click to raise up and sort of keep the mouse down, and it'll start sculpting. You can adjust the strength as well and various other factors. There is foliage you can add too, but I'm not going to go into that, but it's fairly simple. You just add go to the foliage menu, I think the second along, add some grass, and then that will, you can just add it and paint it on. Okay, so at the end of all that, we should have a terrain. We'll start adding some prefabs. So for now, we could just use the prefabs, but if you've also created your own 3D buildings, then you can put those in too. So import your models in if you're importing your own models, probably in a new folder called buildings or custom buildings or something like that. Drag them in, and we're also going to texture those buildings up. I'll show you a bit of video of when I was doing this, just with the prefabs that come within the FPS template. And yeah, that. So basically, just click, drag to the mesh, and as long as the texture can update on that mesh, it will update, and you can just basically paint it on that way. Now, when it comes to actually creating levels, you want to bear a few different things in mind. There's a whole art form, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything, but there are, you want to think about the actual game that you're playing, how you're going to make it interesting, enemy placement, all that sort of thing. You want to think about props in the environment, what is realistic to the environment. So in my example, I created all these sort of weird blocks. Some of them are a bit misscaled actually, but it's because I did it really fast. But yeah, put buildings around, points of interest for the player. You want to have that wow factor to a degree. You can use lighting as well. We'll dive further into that in another video, maybe another tutorial. But yeah, so you can click and drag those prefabs in, then click and drag the materials in to update. So that's that part of that, and that's basically most of the process for how you actually get the level done. In terms of the asset flipping, for the nav mesh, so you do need to make sure that the nav mesh is kept updated. Easiest way to do that, go to left hand side, type in nav. You'll see an object that's called nav mesh area or something like that, go on that, click on that, and find where it says bake, click bake, and it'll rebake according to the new area. Should do it over the entire area. The enemy count for the actual game will auto update based on any new enemies that you add in. You can just right click and duplicate them once you've got them as you like, or you could update the prefab directly. You should have updated the prefab directly anyway, so you could also add them from the prefabs in the left hand menu. Adding sound, so adding background music is the main thing you might want to do. And so you just want to import in a sound asset, MP3 usually, drag it to your scene on the left hand side, and then get it to play on awake, tick the box on the right that says to play on awake, and then loop, and then that piece of music will loop forever. You can also adjust the volume too if it's too low. So I added a piece of music, I just put it in from Pixabay, which seemed the easiest option. Okay, so next, once you've done all that and you've play tested it and it seems to work quite well and it works, you might want to update the menus a bit. So we'll go to the front page, we'll change scenes, go to scenes, find one that says main menu. We want to swap the image out, swap that to something you want. You could also make a specific background if you want. You click on the background image and then you update the image there, the texture. Those will all be under an entity called canvas, which is attached to a camera, and that's how you create UI. You have a UI object you can add like text and menus and buttons. So the button's already set up, so I wouldn't really recommend at this point playing around with them too much. Just maybe look at changing the font style, the colors, which I'll be demonstrating on screen here. Do that for the end, win and the lose screen as well. And then finally, we want to go on to the point where I can actually create a build. So a build is you can do it for Windows or web. We'll try it for Windows first. So go to build and yeah, try and build it from there. The process of which is documented here. So you go to the build, file, build, and then that creates a executable version of the game so you can play it on Windows, or for web it creates a HTML file that you can also play. Okay, so that's probably enough. Again, it's like not something you would do in real life, but I think it is a good exercise because it gives you the starting point for creating an FPS, which otherwise is very difficult, and allows you a bit of flexibility and predefined assets which you can then modify. So that's, I think, it's a good exercise. It's also a good exercise in what's known as blocking out, where you're making a minimal version of a level's design without all the bells and whistles. So blocking out is like where you basically create a very basic low poly almost like version of the map, and then you can add foliage and like little bits of detail as you go on. I hope that's been interesting. I've tried to keep it quite snappy and short and just go over the main bits. I think it's a useful exercise to do, and yeah, I hope it's fun. Been a one nerd. Like and subscribe if that was interesting for more Unity stuff. I've been making a lot more of Unity now. I've been doing it now for like a lot more dedicated for like 2 years. My background was actually starting off in Unreal, but again, I'll just by virtue of the people I work with, I've been doing a lot more Unity. Yeah, I work with a team called Heat Assembly, so you can check us out. Heat Assembly if you want to see the games we made. The most recent one we made was Death and Taxis. Anyway, I'll end this video here, and if you've got any questions, just leave them in the comments below.